Most people never realize how much of their lives are quietly ruled by one subtle behavior, the constant urge to explain themselves. It's so common that we barely notice it. We justify our choices, our moods, our silences, our absences. It feels polite, even thoughtful, a way of showing empathy or respect. But underneath this habit lies something far more profound and unsettling, a fracture within the self. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who reshaped the way we understand the human psyche, saw this as a sign of inner disconnection. According to Jung, when you feel compelled to constantly explain who you are or why you feel what you feel, it's not a gesture of openness. It's a symptom of neglecting your own inner authority. The person who keeps explaining is often chasing something they never received, the permission to simply exist. This pattern usually begins in childhood, inside families where emotions are minimized or dismissed. Stop being dramatic. You're overreacting. That's not a big deal. These phrases teach a child a brutal lesson, that their inner world only matters when others approve of it. Over time, that message becomes a silent prison. The child learns that feelings must be justified to be valid, that thoughts need permission to be real. When that child grows into an adult, the same cycle continues. They start to explain everything, their opinions, their boundaries, their sadness, their joy, not because they want to, but because they fear being misunderstood. They believe that if they explain well enough, maybe others won't judge them. Maybe they won't be rejected. Maybe they'll be allowed to stay. This constant self-justification is, in truth, an attempt to control perception, to manage how others see us so we can feel safe. But safety bought at the cost of self-respect is an illusion. The more we depend on others' understanding to confirm our worth, the less connected we are to our own truth. The price of being understood becomes the loss of autonomy. The person trapped in this loop starts living through an audience's eyes. They act, speak, and even feel in ways that align with external expectations. It's like performing in a theater where everyone else decides the script. And the more convincing the act, the more distant they grow from their authentic self. Jung saw this as one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the process of becoming whole, of becoming who you truly are beneath the masks. The painful truth is this: as long as you need to explain yourself, you are not free. Every explanation you give is a subtle plea. Please let me exist. It's a sophisticated form of submission, disguised as communication. This video is an invitation to break that conditioning, to look at why we feel this endless need to justify our existence, and what happens when we finally stop. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, something shifts. The energy you once spent convincing others starts to return to you. The psyche begins to stand taller, anchored not in approval, but in inner authority. And that changes everything. Behind the habit of over-explaining lies more than social politeness. It's a deep psychic wound. Jung understood that this compulsion is not about communication at all. It's about survival. It reflects an unconscious belief formed long ago. I only have value if others validate me. Think back to how this belief begins. A child expresses sadness and hears they're being too sensitive. They show anger and get told they're difficult. They feel fear, and someone mocks them for being weak. Slowly, the child stops trusting their emotions. They learn that their inner experience is wrong unless it fits the external world's standards. To protect themselves, they develop a strategy. If I explain myself clearly, maybe they won't get angry. Maybe they'll understand. This pattern, once formed, becomes automatic, an invisible reflex carried into adulthood. Every feeling, every decision, every small act must be justified, as if a convincing argument were required to deserve space in the world. At its core, this is the loss of internal authority. The person no longer recognizes their own feelings as inherently valid. They outsource their sense of truth to others, waiting for approval before believing in their own perceptions. And in doing so, they unknowingly hand over their psychological power. What's tragic is that most people living this way don't realize it. They believe they're being kind, reasonable, transparent. But beneath that surface lies fear. Fear of being disliked, misunderstood, or abandoned. And so their words are constantly shaped by an invisible audience. Every explanation becomes a small negotiation for acceptance. Jung believed that to heal, every person must eventually confront this internal structure, this inherited programming of needing to be approved before being authentic. Until we do, we remain trapped in borrowed identities, performing versions of ourselves that others will applaud. The individual becomes a collage of external expectations, not a portrait of their true nature. This is why compulsive self-explanation is not simply bad communication. It's a form of self-abandonment. Every time you reshape your truth to make it more palatable, you betray yourself a little more. And healing begins the moment you stop asking for permission to exist. It's not easy. The first time you choose silence instead of explaining yourself, it feels almost unbearable. You can sense the anxiety rising. What if they think I'm rude? What if they misunderstand me? What if they leave? That discomfort is the echo of years spent depending on others to confirm your worth. But it's also the first step toward freedom. This silence, the refusal to justify, is the foundation of what Jung called internal authority. It's the ability to hold your truth without needing validation. It's the courage to say, "I feel this way," without explaining why. When you stop explaining, the silence that follows is not emptiness. It's the sound of your own presence returning. And though it feels strange at first, that silence becomes powerful. It's the beginning of psychological sovereignty, the moment you realize that your emotions, however messy or misunderstood, don't need external permission to exist. This is what individuation demands, that you stop living as a reflection of others' expectations and start existing as a reflection of your inner truth. Jung warned that this transformation doesn't come without pain. It feels like stepping into solitude because for the first time you're not anchored to the opinions around you. But only in that solitude can a person discover who they truly are. In the next part, we'll explore what it means to build this inner authority, how to move from dependence on external approval to living from your own center. Because once that authority begins to grow, silence stops being a void and becomes a declaration. If what you've heard so far resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe and support this channel. This journey towards self-trust is not easy, but it's the beginning of genuine psychological freedom, the kind Jung devoted his life to helping people find. Compulsive self-explanation is not a harmless social habit. It's a quiet act of betrayal. Not betrayal of others, but of yourself. Every time you twist your words to seem agreeable or soften your emotions so others won't feel uncomfortable, you trade a piece of your authenticity for acceptance. And that trade always comes at a cost. Carl Jung saw this pattern as a fracture between the ego and the self. The ego, which should simply organize our conscious life, becomes obsessed with being liked. It reshapes itself to match what others want to see. Polite, agreeable, compliant. In doing so, it forgets its true purpose, to serve as a bridge between the inner world and the outer one. Instead, it becomes a mask. The tragedy is that this mask is rewarded. Society praises people who adjust easily, who get along, who explain themselves nicely and never disturb the peace. But that peace is deceptive. Beneath it lies exhaustion, the fatigue of constantly monitoring how you appear, the anxiety of performing emotions that aren't real. You know this feeling. When you laugh at a joke that doesn't amuse you. When you say yes, though every part of you wants to say no. when you pretend to be calm while something inside you screams for honesty. Each small concession chips away at your connection to yourself. Jung called this self-alienation, the slow erosion of the soul's voice beneath layers of social performance. Over time, this inner distance breeds symptoms: chronic anxiety, emptiness, decision paralysis, low self-esteem. Because the psyche can't endure prolonged dishonesty, the soul keeps sending signals: discomfort, sadness, restlessness, urging you to return to your truth. But the ego, terrified of rejection, keeps silencing those messages with more explanations. At the heart of this dynamic lies a question Jung asked throughout his work: whose life are you really living? If your choices are always shaped by how they will be received, then you are not living your life. You are living a strategy for belonging. You become a projection of others' comfort, not a reflection of your own essence. The only escape from this loop is through what Jung called individuation, the process of reclaiming inner authority. Internal authority doesn't mean arrogance or refusal to listen. It means knowing that your feelings, your boundaries, your truth are legitimate even when misunderstood. It means you no longer need to convince anyone to let you be who you are. When internal authority starts to develop, something shifts at the core. The need for validation begins to fade. You stop asking, "Will they understand?" and start saying, "This is true for me." That subtle change in language represents a massive change in energy. You move from insecurity to grounding, from negotiation to affirmation. This inner authority is not built overnight. It's cultivated through practice, through moments of discomfort where you resist the old urge to explain. The first time you say no without a justification, you might feel guilt. The first time you express sadness without rationalizing it, you might fear being seen as weak. But each time you stand firm, the ego loosens its grip, and the self, your true center, begins to take its rightful place. Internal authority transforms communication. It turns speech from performance into expression. You no longer talk to be approved, you talk to be real. You no longer listen to defend, you listen to understand. Paradoxically, this makes your presence stronger, not harsher, because authenticity commands quiet respect. In daily life, internal authority reveals itself in small acts: choosing silence instead of over-explaining, saying, "That doesn't feel right to me," without apology, walking away from manipulative conversations instead of trying to win them. It's not about dominance, it's about alignment. Jung taught that the journey toward wholeness requires what he called the desert of solitude. That is the phase when you begin to stand alone with your truth. It's uncomfortable at first because you can no longer rely on external reassurance. But that solitude is sacred. It's where you meet the parts of yourself that were exiled when you tried to please everyone else. And as you rebuild that inner bond, silence becomes your ally. You start realizing that silence isn't weakness, it's clarity. It says, "I don't owe an explanation to exist." Of course, this silence disrupts the old order. People who once depended on your insecurity, those who thrived on your need to explain, will resist. They'll accuse you of being distant, cold, arrogant. But what's really happening is that your silence is exposing their control. When you stop explaining, manipulative dynamics lose oxygen. Emotional games collapse because they require your participation. Some relationships will fade. Let them. That's not loss, it's recalibration. Silence acts as a natural filter, revealing who values you for who you are and who only valued you when you were easy to manage. Jung said that every genuine transformation requires letting go of the false self, and that means certain people, places, and patterns will fall away. What remains is authenticity. You start attracting relationships built on respect rather than approval, connection rather than dependency. Yet the hardest part isn't dealing with others. It's confronting your own inner anxiety. The voice inside that whispers, "You should explain yourself. They'll misunderstand. You'll lose them." That voice is the echo of old conditioning, and this is where silence becomes a spiritual discipline. Each time you resist the impulse to justify, you strengthen your center. Each moment of restraint builds inner power. Silence, in this context, is not the absence of communication. It's the presence of self-trust. It's what Jung called the union of opposites: strength and gentleness, power and calm. When you stop explaining yourself, you start listening differently. You begin to hear your emotions instead of negotiating with them. You recognize what your intuition has been saying all along. That inner listening births integration, the reunion of the fragmented parts of the psyche. From this place of integrity, you no longer need validation because you've become your own source of it. Your silence begins to carry weight. Without words, people feel your presence. They sense the difference. You're no longer reactive, no longer seeking approval. You've stopped auditioning for belonging. You simply are. And that presence changes everything. It changes how others treat you, how you make decisions, how you move through life. Because the world mirrors the energy you project. When your energy says, "I know who I am," others respond with respect. This is the paradox Jung understood so well. The less you try to prove yourself, the more undeniable you become. So, ask yourself, how often do you dilute your truth to stay accepted? How many times have you explained your emotions when you really just needed to feel them? The next time you feel the pull to justify your feelings or choices, pause. Breathe. Let silence speak for you, because that silence is not emptiness. It is authority. It is the quiet echo of someone who has finally come home to themselves. And if this message resonates with you, don't let it stop here. Like the video, share it with someone who still believes they need to earn their right to exist, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because the journey of individuation, the journey Jung devoted his life to, begins exactly here, when you stop explaining and start becoming.